So imagine playing in the biggest sport in the nation and literally no one knows your name. Unknown human enthusiast Professor Jelly here, and today we dive into the unidentified Major League Baseball player page on this episode of Weird Wikipedia. As it currently stands, there are 34 men who played in Major League Baseball that we have no idea what their given names are. All played between 1872 and 1892, and 17 played in the now defunct National Association, which folded in 1875. So the main reason for this anonymity is of course the very limited use of LinkedIn during the time that these boys were playing. And even trying to narrow down potential subjects based on their place of origin can be extremely hard, because you may have, as an example, 30 men who have the last name Stoddard at this time in Brooklyn. So it also really doesn't help that there are multiple unidentified players that share the same last name. But even though that we don't know who they are, that does not mean that they are not interesting in and of themselves. By large, the nameless were local players that were picked up from the team's surrounding community, and most of them only played 1 or 2 games with the team before they were dropped. If you can't tell, Major League Baseball at the time was not exactly at the level of professionalism that it currently operates at. In fact, you could probably say that Juggalos at large are a more organized force than professional teams were at the time. But not all of these players were one-pump chumps, as the Baltimore Monumental player Scott played in 13 games at the professional level without anyone being bothered to ask what his Christian name was. And some received significant media attention and still managed to stay anonymous. As an example, one of the unidentified players, Jones, not to be confused with the other unidentified player Jones, was heavily featured in the New York Times piece. And it is a doozy of a piece featuring red-blooded American Jack Nelson, who stated, "We outbatted the Quakers 10-6, and we did not make a solitary error. Still, we are defeated. That is what I call hard luck, and the hardest kind of hard luck at that." Presumably, Jack Nelson, after losing, jumped in the Hudson River and swam upstream to the Hard Luck Fellowship community that was recently founded in Oneida, where he lived out the rest of his days in ridicule. And despite his team's poor performance, Jones was stated to have a very good game, and he was predicted to join the Mets. However, fate would have it another way, and he never played another game. Others were not as successful in their limited careers in the MLB, and the crown jewel of these is Lewis. Now, while the other players I feel like we just don't know their first names, I personally feel that Lewis is the type of man that only has one name, like Seal. Lewis was a local Brooklyn boy and played his 1 professional game for the Buffalo Bisons on July 12, 1890. And while other players like Jones would have used this time to show their great skills and show how they would be a great asset to the team, Lewis used this time to assert dominance by playing one of the worst games in recorded history. Lewis pitched the first 3 innings where he allowed 20 earned runs, which earned him an ERA of 60. It should be noted that a good ERA is below 2.0. Now, while there is some dispute about some of these measurements in the game because it was 1890 and they were still doing cocaine for ghosts in your blood, but it is likely that Lewis holds the single season highest ERA in pro ball history. After these first mythical innings, Lewis was so good that he was promoted from pitcher to left field, where he stayed for the rest of the game. This performance was captured across several outlets, where he was described as a failure, a disastrous experiment, and a much disgusted ball tosser. Not many people know this, but you actually pronounce Lewis as legend, and you take your hat off when you do it. It was said that it was one of the greatest slugging matches ever seen since curve pitching came into vogue. Lewis is the type of man that asks, if the game is about hitting a ball, why would I make that difficult for the other team? Not the hero we deserved, but the hero we needed. And despite the massive notoriety that he gained from his 1 game as a pro baller, as of today, Lewis's first name is still described as being mercifully unknown. Today, these players form a very interesting side of the early days of baseball, when many of the rules and procedures of the game that we know today were still being ironed out. And somehow, through their anonymity, they're so much more interesting than if we actually knew what their names were. Lewis was the worst to play the game, but we don't know his name, cause he never told anybody, cause no one asked. The names of these men will likely never be discovered, but something that has been discovered is the 7 basic plots which form all stories, of which I made a video about right here